It's the kind of cold that bites clean through your jacket. December in Tallahassee, Florida. A brutal front has torn through overnight, dropping temperatures to 19 degrees. The kind of morning most folks in the South don't even own the right coat for. But out on Lake Seal, a dark, gator-infested stretch of water just outside the city, a small aluminum boat sits completely still, drifting, engine off, no hunter inside, just a shotgun, still in its case, a few decoys stacked on top, and silence. The man who launched that boat this morning was Mike Williams, 31 years old, real estate executive, loving father, devoted husband, and today of all days, his 6th wedding anniversary. He told his wife he'd be home by noon. He never came home for weeks. They searched that lake. Divers, helicopters, hundreds of volunteers, more than 700 man-hours. And they found nothing, not a body, not a bone, not a shred of human tissue. The official theory? The alligators got him. But here's the thing about that theory. It's wrong. And the truth, when it finally came out, 18 years later, is one of the most calculated, ice-cold betrayals you will ever hear. To understand what happened on that lake, you have to understand who Mike Williams was. He grew up in Tallahassee, Leon County, Florida. Not rich, but hungry. The kind of guy who wanted more out of life than what he started with and had the work ethic to go get it. By the time he was 31, he was already killing it in real estate appraisals. He put himself through college holding down 2 jobs, at the same time one of them with Ketchum Real Estate Appraisers, where his boss, Clay Ketchum, would later describe him as a young man on the fast track. He was also a family man, through and through. Mike and his wife, Denise, had been together since the 9th grade at a private Christian school in Tallahassee. Classic story, he was the football jock, she was the cheerleader. High school sweethearts who went the distance. They got married, had a daughter named Ansley, built a life together. And Mike adored that little girl. Everyone who knew him said so. His other great love? Duck hunting. Specifically Lake Seal. He'd grown up on that water. Knew every inlet, every current, every fog bank. He hunted it alone sometimes, which, for an experienced outdoorsman like Mike, was completely normal. This was a man who had everything to live for, which makes what happened next so hard to stomach. Before we go any further, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We drop new cases every week, and you do not want to miss what's coming. It's December 16th, 2000. Mike Williams wakes up before dawn, grabs his gear, and heads out to Lake Seal. A cold front ripped through Tallahassee. Overnight temperatures have cratered. The wind is vicious, and the skies are slate gray. It is not a pleasant morning to be outside. But Mike loves this. This is his thing. Before he leaves, he makes a promise to Denise. He'll be back by noon. They have plans, a little bed, and breakfast down south, just the two of them, celebrating 6 years of marriage. Noon comes. No Mike. Denise starts calling his cell phone. No answer. She tries again and again. By the time daylight fades into a cold, dark evening, Denise is frantic. She calls her father. She calls friends. And she calls Mike's best buddy, Brian Winchester, who rushes out to help search the lake. Florida Fish and Wildlife Officer David Arnett is the first investigator on the scene. What he finds is a lake being swallowed by darkness, brutal wind, and dropping temperatures. The search is called off for the night. The next morning, they get their first lead. They find the boat drifting about 300 yards from where Mike had launched it. His truck and trailer are still parked at the ramp. The boat tells a strange story. It looks like it was launched by one person, then pushed out. The shotgun is there, still in its case. The decoys are stacked neatly. The gas tank full, like the boat was barely used that morning. But no Mike. What followed was one of the most exhaustive searches in Leon County history. Divers went into the water. Helicopters swept the lake from the air. Search crews combed the shoreline with dogs. 44 days, over 700 man-hours. They found nothing. Not a body, not a boot, not a scrap of clothing. And at that point, investigators made a decision that would haunt this case for nearly 2 decades. They called it an accident. Florida Fish and Wildlife investigators figured it this way. Mike fell out of the boat, got pulled under by the weight of his waders, and drowned. The alligators took care of the rest. It's not an outrageous theory on its face. Lake Seal has a healthy gator population. Accidents happen. Case closed. Except it doesn't hold water, not even close. Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, was the first to put her finger on the most obvious problem. It was December, 19 degrees. Alligators are cold-blooded reptiles. When the temperature drops, their metabolism shuts way down. They don't eat. They don't hunt. They go into a kind of dormancy, almost zombie-like, as one investigator later described it. Wildlife experts and people who had spent their entire lives around Lake Seal said the same thing. Alligators don't eat in cold water. They just don't. But even if you set the temperature aside, even if somehow a gator was hungry enough to attack a Grown man alligators don't consume people whole. They don't work that way. They tear, they thrash, they take off an arm, a leg. There are always pieces left behind. Always. Every single person who had ever gone missing on Lake Seol had eventually been found. Everyone. Mike Williams left behind nothing. No bones, no gnawed tissue. Not a single fragment that could be identified as human. The murkiest, algae-choked lake bottom in Leon County, and somehow Mike Williams left absolutely zero trace. People who had lived on that water their whole lives quietly started saying the same thing among themselves. This doesn't feel right. But without a body, without physical evidence, and with investigators already convinced it was an accident, there was nothing to push against. Until the lake started giving things back. And what it gave back raised even more questions than it answered. 6 months after Mike disappeared, 6 months a hat shows up floating on the surface of Lake Seol, right near the boat launch, right where Mike would have put in that December morning. Nobody can explain why it wasn't found during the original 44-day search. Investigators had combed that area dozens of times. It should have turned up. It didn't. Brian Winchester, Mike's best friend, examined the hat and said it looked like something Mike might have owned. A DNA test came back inconclusive. Then a fisherman pulls up a pair of waders, the same kind Mike was wearing the morning he vanished. And here is where things get strange. The waders are completely intact. Not a single tooth mark, no tearing, no damage from an alligator attack. For a pair of waders that supposedly went through a gator feeding, they're pristine. Then divers at the scene pull up Mike's hunting jacket. His hunting license is still legible, and his flashlight, after 6 full months submerged at the bottom of a mossy, algae-coated lake, still working. Think about that for a second. 6 months underwater, in a lake known for its thick, decomposing algae floor. And Mike's gear comes up looking like it was dropped in last Tuesday. Investigators and journalists who later examined the evidence came to the same conclusion. They were too new. They were so clearly planted. Someone had staged this scene. Carefully, deliberately. They'd held onto Mike's gear, then released it at strategic intervals. First the hat, then the waders, then the jacket, creating a trail of breadcrumbs designed to point back to the alligator drowning story. And it worked. Because a few months later, that planted evidence became the cornerstone of a legal argument that changed everything. I need you to stay with me right here, because what I'm about to tell you is where this case goes from suspicious to sinister. But first, what time is it where you're watching? And what's the weather like? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. In most Florida cases, you have to wait 5 full years before a missing person can be legally declared dead. 5 years. Denise Williams didn't wait 5 years. She didn't wait 2 years. She didn't even wait 1. 6 months after her husband vanished, using the planted hat, the intact waders, and the still-working flashlight as her evidence, Denise walked into a Florida courtroom and convinced a judge to issue Mike Williams' death certificate. With that death certificate came the life insurance payout. And here's where you need to sit down. There were 2 life insurance policies on Mike Williams. The larger one, worth $1.5 million, had been written just 6 months before he went missing. 6 months. As in, right around the same time someone would have needed to start making plans. The policy was filled out as if Mike himself had signed it. Investigators later noted he may not have even known it existed. Who sold Mike Williams that $1.5 million life insurance policy? Brian Winchester, his best friend. The same man who stood beside Denise on the lakeshore the night Mike went missing. The same man who identified the hat. The beneficiary on both policies, Denise. But the insurance money was only the beginning. It came out confirmed by multiple people who were close to the family that Denise and Brian had been having an affair. Not after Mike disappeared. Before he went missing. Before the boat was found drifting. Before the planted waders. Before the death certificate. The affair was already happening. Brian Winchester divorced his own wife. And then he married Denise Williams, the widow of his best friend, and moved into the house where Mike used to live. Mike's brother Nick put it plainly. If Brian and Denise were involved in killing Mike, getting married made perfect legal sense. Spouses can't be compelled to testify against each other in court. It was, in his words, a calculated decision. And there was one more thing that quietly unsettled people who knew Mike well. His shotgun, the one found in that drifting boat. Multiple people who knew Mike said it wasn't the gun he used for duck hunting. It was a different firearm, one he kept locked in his office. To access that office after hours, you needed a personal security code. A check of the office logs showed the door had been opened that morning. Using Mike's code, Mike Williams may never have made it to that lake at all. While Denise collected her insurance money and built a new life with Brian Winchester, Mike's mother, Cheryl, was doing something very different. She was fighting. Cheryl Williams was not a woman with connections or resources. She wasn't a lawyer or a lobbyist. She was a mother who had lost her son and had absolutely nothing to bury. She took out full-page ads in the Tallahassee Democrat. She put up billboards. She wrote letters to law enforcement, to politicians, all the way up to the governor's office. She stood in front of anyone who would listen and said, "My son did not drown. Something happened to him. Please look." The response for years was near silence. Denise made it worse. She threatened Cheryl, directly told her that if she kept pushing for a criminal investigation, she would lose access to Ansley, Mike's daughter, her own granddaughter. Cheryl had already lost her son. Now she was being told to stay quiet or lose the last piece of him. She kept fighting anyway. "I wasn't there to help you," Cheryl said publicly. "How did you die? Were you in pain? Was it quick? It's horrible." 6 years after Mike disappeared, a reporter named Jennifer Portman at the Tallahassee Democrat saw one of Cheryl's ads. She pulled the file on the case. She read the record, and she couldn't believe how thin it was and how many things didn't add up. She wrote the story. And the story started a chain reaction that would take another decade to reach its conclusion. Cheryl Williams fought alone for years, silenced, threatened, cut off from her granddaughter, and she still didn't stop. If this story deserves to be told, share it right now. Let's make sure Mike's name is not forgotten. For years, investigators knew something was wrong, but knowing and proving are two different things. There was no body, no murder weapon, no physical evidence placing anyone at a crime scene. The only things they had were a timeline that felt off, insurance money that seemed obscene, and a marriage between a widow and her dead husband's best friend. Suspicious? Absolutely. Prosecutable? Not yet. Then Brian Winchester's marriage to Denise began to fall apart. By 2017, they were heading for divorce, and Brian Winchester did not take it well. One afternoon, Denise walked out to her car and Brian was already inside, waiting, with a gun. He grabbed the steering wheel, shoved the weapon into her ribs, screamed at her. She described it later in court as the most terrifying moment of her life, and given what investigators now suspected she was capable of, that is saying something. Brian Winchester was arrested and charged with kidnapping, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and armed burglary. He pleaded not guilty. But he was now sitting in a Florida jail cell, staring down serious prison time. And prosecutors had leverage they hadn't had before. In 2017, Brian Winchester agreed to talk. What he told investigators was this: Mike Williams did not drown in Lake Seal. He never made it to the water that morning. According to Winchester's account, Mike was shot and killed. His body was removed from the scene, driven to a different location, and buried. The boat was staged. The gear was planted. The entire drowning narrative was constructed after the fact. Brian Winchester implicated Denise Williams as the architect of the plan. For Cheryl Williams, 17 years of unanswered questions came crashing down at once. Her son hadn't drowned. He hadn't been eaten by alligators. He had been murdered on his wedding anniversary by the people he trusted most in the world. Law enforcement used Brian's cooperation to locate Mike's remains, which were found buried far from the lake exactly as he described. After all of it, the ads, the billboards, the threats, the silence, Cheryl Williams finally had her son back. In 2017, Denise Williams was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory after the fact in the death of her husband. The trial began in November 2017 in Tallahassee, the same city where Mike had built his career, raised his daughter, and planned a future that was taken from him. Brian Winchester testified against her. He told the jury exactly what happened that December morning in 2000, how Mike was killed, where his body was taken, how the two of them spent years constructing and maintaining a lie. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty. Denise Williams was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison. Brian Winchester, because of his cooperation deal, received a lighter sentence, though he would later face additional prison time related to the kidnapping charge, involving Denise herself. Mike's daughter Ansley, who had grown up believing her father drowned in an accident, who had read a victim impact statement in court on behalf of her mother during the kidnapping case, not yet knowing the full truth, eventually had to come to terms with the reality that the woman she had been defending had killed her father. There are no words for what that kind of reckoning feels like. As for Cheryl Williams, after 17 years of fighting alone, of being threatened and ignored, and shut out from her granddaughter, she finally got the one thing she had never stopped asking for: the truth. Let's go back to that lake for a second. Lake Seal, December 16, 2000. A cold front tearing through Tallahassee. A man who just wanted to go duck hunting on his wedding anniversary morning. Mike Williams woke up that day thinking about ducks on the water. He was thinking about the little bed and breakfast where he'd surprised Denise that afternoon. He was probably thinking about Ansley, his daughter, and the life he was still building for her. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea that the two people he trusted most in the world had already decided he wasn't going to make it home. The lake didn't swallow Mike Williams. People did, people he loved. And the only reason we know his name today, the only reason this story has an ending is because a mother refused to stop asking the question everybody else had moved on from. Where is my son? Cheryl Williams asked that question for 17 years. She finally got her answer. Mike Williams was murdered on December 16, 2000. His family waited 18 years for justice. 18 years. If this case hit you the way it hit me, smash that like button, share this video, and tell me in the comments. Did you see the twist coming? Because I read every single comment. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. The next case drops soon, and I promise you it is just as dark. You don't want to miss it.